This is the West, sir. When the legend becomes fact, print the legend. Welcome to Your Pick, a film podcast. I'm Geneva.
And I'm Tatum.
We're two friends who love movies and love sharing them with each other. Each week, we take turns picking a film that is close to our hearts and talk about why it moves us, to tears, to laughter, and everything in between. We celebrate the craft of filmmaking, as well as the unique and personal ways we find meaning in the movies we watch. So, Tatum, we are back again. What have you been watching?
Here we are, back in on our podcast here. That's my best Jimmy Stewart.
Are you going for a Humphrey Bogart? What's happening here? Edward G. Robinson?
No, that's my Jimmy Stewart. Take it or leave it. Okay, bye.
Wow, great job.
Thank you.
It's all right. We've got time to work on. Have you been watching anything this week? I know your time continues to be crazy.
Yeah, actually, believe it or not, I had the opportunity to watch two things this week. Because I don't really know how that worked out, but it did. So I got to watch two things. The first thing I watched was the one of the Oscar nominees for Best Picture, Triangle of Sadness.
Ooh.
And then the other one I finally got to watch one of the movies that was nominated for Best International Feature, Argentina, 1985. And so, yeah, I watched both of those this week. I will say I have no idea why Triangle of Sadness was nominated for Best Picture. I think that this is a very divisive film. I see some people that really like it, and then some people like me that are just like, why? And I don't know if the reason I didn't particularly enjoy this film is because it came out in the same year as The White Lotus Season 2 and The Menu, and this kind of
Not to mention Glass Onion, and I feel like there's probably a handful of things that are dealing with similar sort of eat the rich themes.
I just feel like this theme is very overdone at this point. But I really did try to look past that and just enjoy the movie itself, apart from the fact that we've seen this story or this theme a million times in the last year. But ultimately, I really was very underwhelmed by this film. For those people who don't know, it's a film that's, again, about classism, basically, and the wealthy. But this is a satire. So it kind of hammers down your throat the concept of rich people are privileged, but does it in a satirical sort of way. I thought the film did start out strong. I thought it had some interesting dialogue and some interesting perspectives on modeling and being internet influencers and social media influencers and what relationships look like when you live in that kind of world. There was some really good dialogue in the beginning that I enjoyed. But by the time the movie moved to the cruise ship, it completely lost me. And that's a fair chunk of the film. I found it to be very boring because I felt like the movie didn't have anything else to say beyond rich people are privileged and classism sucks. And
real shocker there.
Yeah, I just kept wanting there to be something more. I just kept thinking, are you going to contribute anything else to this conversation? Do you have any other type of perspective on this other than just stating the obvious and stating it over and over and over and over again? And ultimately, I found that it never really moved past that. And so I was very underwhelmed, and I was honestly quite bored. I could barely get through it. It's way too long. Also, this movie does not need to be 2.5 hours long. There are some sequences in here that could have been done in 5 minutes, but they make them 25 minutes. It's like, why? So yeah, I was not a fan of the movie. I found it to be unoriginal, and that's my take on it. I have no idea why it was nominated for Best Picture.
That's
Um,
disappointing. I have not yet seen it. That's the last of the Best Picture nominees that I have to see. And I think it just got added to Hulu, right? Is that where you watched it? Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm planning on, I'll see it this week then. I'll see. Maybe I'll like it a little more than you, but we don't. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, maybe you will like it more because I don't think you've watched. Well, I was going to say you haven't watched The White Lotus, but you've also seen Glass Onion and The Menu. So you have also been consuming this
Oh,
type
yeah.
of
It's a
theme.
lot of that.
So,
A lot of that coming out recently.
yeah, so you might be as worn out by it as I am. I don't know, but I'd be interested to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I did
Um,
like the menu quite a bit. So and just the previews for both of them made them look so similar. So
mm-hmm.
I feel like my the fact that I like the menu may work against it, and just that I feel
Mm-hmm.
like I'll be just like this is the same thing all over again. But I don't want to prejudge it. We'll
Yeah.
see.
I feel like the menu, because on my Letterboxd movies for the year, I did rank the menu higher than Triangle of Sadness. I'm not particularly a huge fan of the menu, but I at least found the menu to be entertaining. I think it kind of falls apart at the end, but I do find that movie to be entertaining. Whereas Triangle of Sadness, I was just like, why? This is, I'm just bored. Um,
Yeah.
anyway, but yeah, I also watched Argentina 1985, which is a film that is documenting. I don't. So, so there was a civil war that happened in Argentina in the 19. I think it was the 19 late 1970s into the early 1980s. I think it was. Where essentially Argentina was run by a military government and they brutally basically kidnapped and tortured millions of people and their bodies were never found. And so in the country, they're very famously called the desaparecidos, which in English means the disappeared. And I actually took a class on this in college that was literally just about this war in Argentina, but that was like 10 years ago, so I don't remember all the details. But this film follows the lawyer who is basically chosen to lead the court case that is attempting to convict a lot of the people that were in charge of the government
Oh,
at that time.
fascinating.
And so it was a huge case. There was a lot of danger for the prosecutor
Mm.
of people who were like, we will kill you if you keep pursuing this. So anyway, that's the premise of the movie. I thought the movie was very beautifully shot. I thought the cinematography was great. I thought that the acting performances were very impressive. I do think that I I liked the movie. I did not love the movie. I felt like it was one of the things I did really appreciate about it was very, very it highlighted capturing the stories of the desaparecidos. It was focusing on these are the people who disappeared. This is how they struggled. And I think that that's really, really important. But I felt like the other court case, like investigation side of it, the preparing for the courtroom, that the lawyers, I felt that that was a little bit incomplete. So it was like, we have them in the courtroom sharing all of these stories and collecting all of these stories, and that's the real powerful part. But then they go outside of the courtroom, and I felt like it just wasn't necessarily as well put together, all of the other stuff that was happening like behind the scenes. So yeah, I mean, I enjoyed the movie. I think that it's worth watching for people that don't necessarily know about this war that happened and the desaparecidos and how that affected the whole country. The movie doesn't go into everything, obviously, because that's a huge thing to go into. But yeah, I would highly recommend it, and I think it was well made. So yeah, I think it definitely deserved its nomination for Best International Feature. So yeah.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for that. That's fascinating. I saw that title, of course, when the Best International Feature nominations came out, but I had no idea that that's what that was about. So, yeah. Where did you say that you saw it?
It's been on Amazon Prime for a while, actually.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I'll search that out. That looks sounds really interesting.
Yeah, it is. I think you'd like it.
Yeah, I do love a like a good court case movie.
Mm-hmm.
Or I love a historical a movie set or historical time period.
Hmm.
So
I will
yeah.
say when I started watching it, it it was initially in English, and I was like, "What is going on? Why is this movie in English?" But then I realized that the version I was watching was dubbed, and I was like, "Oh, I hate
Oh
this."
no.
So then I switched the language to Spanish. And fun fact, I actually really struggle with understanding Argentinian Spanish. Because the way that they pronounce words is so not just the ja, but like so many of the pronunciations are different and they use a lot of different vocabulary than I'm used to. So I was watching the movie and I was like, I need subtitles because I can't understand what they're
Interesting.
saying.
Yeah. Is
But
it
anyway,
different enough to be called a dialect, or is it just a very strong accent that can be difficult if you're not familiar with it?
I mean, I don't know the definition of dialect, so I don't know, but I will say that like the vocabulary is different enough that there were a lot of words that I genuinely didn't know what they were. So maybe that means it
Sure.
would be a different dialect. I don't know. But also, I'm not a native Spanish speaker. So if someone's a native Spanish speaker, they probably would understand it a lot more easily than I would because they know those words. Or maybe
Sure.
they do. I don't know. But it was interesting.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Fascinating. Well, for me this week, I saw three things. First, I watched a movie from the 1950s called Niagara, which is a sort of a suspense thriller. It is a dramatic performance from Marilyn Monroe. So most of the Marilyn Monroe films I've seen are comedic roles, but here she's playing very much a femme fatale. And I will say the plot is it's okay. It's definitely kind of, Alfred Hitchcock vibes. It's not directed by Alfred Hitchcock, but that sort of very noirish, suspenseful, psychological um type of narrative. I wouldn't say that the story itself is the best that I've seen, but I will say that this film, the cinematography, oh my goodness, this looks so beautiful. Obviously, it is set, as the name would imply, it's set at Niagara Falls. It is a couple played by Marilyn Monroe and Joseph Cotton who have been married for a while and hate each other and have come there. Basically, Marilyn Monroe, we quickly find out, basically neither of them have each other's best interest at heart. And there is a murder attempt that is made, and I won't spoil anything further. But the setting of, it is filmed, a lot of it is filmed around actual Niagara Falls of the 1950s. There's some locations that I recognize from the time that I went there when I was younger with my family. They brought a camera there, brought the actors there. Very interesting to see the way it's changed or not changed over the last 50 years. But yeah, this movie just absolutely looks gorgeous. The way that they use color, the way they use shadows is it's just stunning. Marilyn Monroe, gorgeous, gorgeous woman, absolutely incredibly styled. Her costuming is wonderful. Her acting is great. It's really fun to see her in a more dramatic, more villainous role than what I usually see her in. So that was a lot of fun. So yeah, I would say check it out if you're interested um, in seeing Marilyn Monroe do something that is not a comedy. Next is a movie I watched just last night, and I'd heard this is a recent movie, and when I first heard the premise, I was like, wow, this sounds right up my alley. It is called The Kid Detective. Basically, the premise of it is what if Encyclopedia Brown grew up and was like a 35-year-old loser who's still solving small town crimes in his small town and is kind of at a dead end in life, and then he's hired to solve a real murder and has to figure it out. But the movie is actually, I mean, that's kind of a great idea for a premise to begin with. The movie is actually, I would say, even better than that, though. It is actually surprisingly a really good movie, I would say.
Why do you
Um,
say surprisingly? Did you expect
just
it to be bad?
I don't know. It's just I feel like when you say what if Encyclopedia Brown grew up, you're like, okay, well that's like could be a really silly, just riffing on um riffing on or parodying the idea of Encyclopedia Brown. Like it could be a really dumb comedy. It could be a premise for a really dumb comedy, but instead it's this sort of noirish, very dark comedy mixed with actual legitimate drama and suspense. And
Oh, I
the
just looked up Encyclopedia Brown because I had no idea what it was.
Wait, you've never
So,
read Encyclopedia Brown growing up?
no.
Oh my goodness. Oh, you missed out. Yeah. For those who don't know, Encyclopedia Brown is a series of children's books. I loved mysteries when I was a kid, so I was obsessed with these books. The premise is that it's a child who's preternaturally smart and is able to solve mysteries, and so people will bring him, um, you know, who stole the cash from the
Who
out of my
stole the cookie
locker,
from the
or
cookie jar? Was you?
you know, that sort of thing. Just like ground level kid stuff. But um, yeah, so the anyway, anyway, the movie is about it's starring Adam Brody, and he is yeah, he was a kid detective, and so he grew up with all these people telling him that he's this brilliant genius, and then life kind of happens and he finds himself stuck in the same place that he was 20 years ago, and his town has fallen into decay, and everyone kind of looks at him with pity because he hasn't really done anything with his life. He drinks too much. He His finances are in a terrible state. He's just things are not going well for him. And then this girl comes to him and says, "Can you solve the murder of my boyfriend?" And all of a sudden he's confronted with, "Well, now I actually have to live up to the promise that I showed all of these years ago. And can I do that? What do I do with all of these things?" So yeah, check out this movie. It is really good. Adam Brody is a
Would it be a
mhm,
good movie to watch if you have no connection to Encyclopedia Brown?
yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah, they explain the premise. It is not an actual, to be clear, it's not an actual Encyclopedia Brown um, movie. That's clearly what is it's riffing off of, but they establish
Oh, okay.
what the premise of it is, independent of that. Adam Brody's a wonderful actor, and gives a really great performance. There's a lot of comedy in it, in the way that um, in a lot of the situations he finds himself. But like I said, it's also kind of layered in a very interesting, dark, sometimes very sad character study that yeah, it really got me in the end. It was kind of emotional and also legitimately terrifying in certain parts. And yeah, I would really recommend this movie.
Hmm.
Kid Detective. And then
Nice.
the last one is my beloved Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris. I finally saw it,
I'm so
and
happy you finally
it
got to
was
see it.
everything that I wanted it to
For the listener, I want you all to know Geneva has been wanting to see this movie for forever.
I somehow knew. I gleaned just from the trailer, this movie is going to be everything to me, and I finally saw it, and guess what? It was. This movie is everything that I could ask for.
Where does it rank for your 2022 movies?
I don't know. I've gotta re-rank my list because I've seen a few recently that I haven't yet um put up on my list. I can tell you,
Has it
definitely.
surpassed Nope?
Well, I'm not gonna say it's number one, but
Okay.
it's in the top 10. I'm pretty sure I can tell you that at this
All
point.
right.
Yeah, it's got everything you could possibly want from this type of movie. It's got a great performance from a sweet little um, middle-aged British character actor and actress in the form of Leslie Manville, giving a really wonderful performance. It's set in the 1950s. It's got absolutely gorgeous Dior gowns. It's got a really, really cute subplot about two sweet young French people who just want to be together and are too nervous to tell each other that they like each other, and so they have to have Mrs. Harris come into their lives and give them the push they need. And it's got actually some nice, thoughtful themes about the power and the role of art in our lives, and how art should not be restricted to one class or the other, about how art can elevate us and inspire us to be better versions of who we are, and that it's really important for people of all classes to have access to that. So, yeah, I really love this movie. I would recommend. Mrs.
I'm
Harris
so
Goes to
happy you
Paris.
got to see it. I'm so happy you got to see it.
I am too. Yeah. All right. All right. Well, with all of that, let's move on to the movie we're actually going to be talking about this week, which is the 1962 Western, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, which is directed by John Ford, starring John Wayne, Jimmy Stewart, Lee Marvin, and Vera Miles. So, Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. So, this is a Western. The American Western had been around, well, has been around as a genre since before the invention of film. There were Western pulp novels and story magazines for since basically since the American West has existed. But it really flourished with the advent of film. Westerns were relatively cheap to produce, they were visually engaging, there was a familiar set of themes and character archetypes at hand. So they were produced in the hundreds during Hollywood's first half century. A lot of the early TV shows that were made when TV first came onto the scene were westerns. As the genre matured, however, directors became more and more interested in remixing its familiar elements, not just for mass entertainment, but to explore the dark side of human nature, and to both celebrate and critique the American mythos. The Western, of course, is very much associated with America's founding myths. No director is more associated with the classic Hollywood Western than John Ford, whose legendary collaborations with actor John Wayne produced such films as Stagecoach, She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, The Searchers, and of course, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. In this film, which is adapted from a short story by Dorothy Johnson, Ford teams Wayne with Jimmy Stewart. Stewart made a lot of westerns throughout his career, but his gentle, intellectual, yet down-to-earth on-screen persona could not be more different from the hardened, cool yet violent characters that Wayne often specialized in. Wayne uses those differences to great effect by placing both of their characters in opposition to a lawless bully, the outlaw Liberty Valance, played by Lee Marvin. At the same time, Stewart and Wayne their characters are rivals for the love of Hallie, played by Vera Miles. The contrast between their characters symbolizes opposing forces within the American founding myth, the old Western frontier versus the civilization of the modern age, freedom through strength and violence versus freedom through education and law. In the process, it raises questions about the stories that a nation chooses to tell about itself. All right, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. So, this is a movie that I honestly can't remember the first time I'd seen it, probably around high school or so. I'd seen it a couple times over the years since, liked it a lot. And um, yeah, I've always really been attracted to the the darkness and the kind of complication of it. Um, I enjoy the Western genre in general. I would not say I'm super well versed in the Western. I particularly haven't seen many of the kind of 60s, 70s, 80s Western deconstruction, Clint Eastwood, the spaghetti Westerns, Unforgiven, things like that. But I grew up with a dad who loves a loves a John Wayne movie, so I've seen several of those in my time. Tatum, I know you have very strong feelings about the Western genre in particular, so I'm curious about, well, both you could talk about that, but then I'm also curious about your experience of seeing this movie.
Well, I want to start by saying that it's not that I have strong feelings about Westerns. Westerns are not movies where I'm like, I hate them. I'm just, they're just not my jam. I don't think that they're bad movies. I don't think that they shouldn't exist. I don't hate them. They're just not my thing. I don't get them. I find them to be just uninteresting to me. They don't interest me at all. And I've seen, similar to Geneva, I haven't seen a lot of the classic ones. I've mostly seen newer ones like No Country for Old Men and the more recent, what was it called? The one with Jeff Bridges that was a remake, True Grit. I've seen True Grit. I've seen, there was what was it? 310 to Yuma. So I've seen a lot more of the more recent ones, and I think two of those are remakes of classics.
Do you see The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert
No.
Ford? Oh,
Mm-mm.
just
So
curious.
I will say I know that there are a lot of people that very passionately love Westerns, and they're probably screaming right now, Tatum, you've only seen the bad ones. You haven't seen the good ones. That's why you don't like them. That could very well be true. But the ones that I have
I don't think
seen,
any of the ones you've listed are bad.
yeah, I don't know.
I mean, they're very, very specifically of that sort of newer Western, which is that, it's a different vibe than different eras of the Western,
Well, I'm
but
just thinking
still
if there's
Western.
people that are like classic West, like they love the like they love the John Ford, they probably are like, well, you have to watch these instead. You have to watch Clint Eastwood
Gotcha.
and I've never done that because the ones I have seen have not made me want to watch anymore. So I will say that
Sure,
right off the
sure.
bat. But before I go into sharing my specific opinions about this movie in particular, Geneva, I want to ask you a question because you had mentioned, I don't remember if you mentioned this on the podcast or if you just mentioned it to me personally when we weren't recording, but you had initially chosen Rio Bravo for this, but then you switched to The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. And I think you told me that you switched it because you thought that there was a higher chance that I would like this one instead of the other one. So why do you think that, what are the things about this movie that you were like, this might speak to Tatum a little bit more than something else? I'm curious.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, for fuller context, Liberty or Rio Bravo is probably my favorite Western. I will say I've not seen it in several years, but that one has really stuck with me over the years. I've rewatched it many times. I switched it to Liberty Valance, I think, partly honestly because Liberty Valance is a bit shorter. Rio Bravo is,
Mm-hmm.
um, I think it's in the maybe not quite 2.5 hours, but definitely more in the like 2:15 ish. Whereas I believe this is right around the 2 hour mark. Rio Bravo's a bit slower, and there are long stretches of the movie where it's just kind of the characters hanging out with each other, and um, it's a bit more about building atmosphere than about action. Um, yeah, and then I was curious how the this film's themes about the sort of um, examination and deconstruction of the Western sort of mythos would appeal to you. I know that's not typically what you're looking for um, in terms of that sort of thematic exploration. It's not necessarily the first thing that jumps out at you when you're experiencing movies. Um, but yeah, Rio Bravo is yeah, a movie I love, but it's exploring something a bit different. So yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah, I was just curious. Um, okay. So to get to my opinions of this movie, um, I'm trying to think about how to put this into words. I will say I did not hate the movie.
That's good.
I will.
That's
I will
more than I could have
say.
expected.
I will say that this movie bothered me.
Hmm.
The reason it bothered me is because I felt like it did a bait and switch, and I hated the bait and switch. Because it felt like it was going in this direction that I was totally in on. I was, my thoughts were just the whole first quarter to first third of this movie of him getting to this town and him meeting this woman. And I think Hallie's really great and she's super smart and really intelligent, and just love her dynamic, how she commands a room but is also kind-hearted at the same time, generous. I just think she's a very well-rounded character. I loved the concept of Rance teaching a literacy school, teaching people how to read. I felt like the movie was really going in a direction of more so like, I don't know, civil rights / women's rights / education and why that matters. And I loved that. And then it switched, and Hallie was barely in the second half of the movie at all. And then we never saw the school again. And then it went down this direction of, oh, now we're doing the Western thing of just, okay, here's a bad guy who's terrorizing this town for reasons that I don't care about, because the reasons I feel like aren't really established. It's kind of like, oh, he's the bad guy because he's the bad guy. I'm like, I don't know what his motivations are. I don't know why he's doing this other than just, oh, I'm a mean man who wants to come in and torture people and blah, and that's my character. I'm like, that's not a well-rounded character. But now the whole movie is about you, and I don't care about you. Let's go back to the other story. So basically, I liked the movie until it became a Western. And then once it became a Western, I was bored. I felt like the movie didn't have much to offer in the second half other than what's the better way to go about, you know, bringing justice. Is it better to go about it through law or better to go about it through violence? But I feel like they didn't even go into that in a super deep way. It was kind of just, okay, well, let's have them face off in the street, and now he's Western a politician, and it just, I found that the twist at the end was not surprising. I knew that freaking John Wayne's character shot the guy before they revealed it. I knew that, so I thought that whole tension was boring. I don't know. This movie bothered me because I really liked how it started, and then I felt like it just became something that I wasn't asking for in the second half. I think it's a tragedy that Hallie is pushed into like a minor character and kind of all but disappears until the end. So yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't hate the movie, but I didn't care for the Western parts of it, and I think that just says a lot about me not liking the Western format of things. So
yeah.
Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, that's
Feel
interesting.
free to disagree, but that's where I stand on it.
I certainly will. But no, that's interesting because that gives me some helpful context on what it is that you don't like about the Western genre, why it is that it doesn't engage you. Because, I mean, for this movie, the second half of this movie, it's very much of a piece to me, where the first half of it is setting up the second half. You know, the first half is showing, here are all the things that Rance can offer to this town. He can offer the opportunity for education. He can offer democracy and law and the ability for people to participate and learn and become part of a society where everyone is equal and everyone has a voice. But in order to get there, he has to confront the forces of chaos, basically, which is Liberty Valance and his sort of bullying, power hungry, I'm just out for me, and I'm getting paid by the powerful forces who we don't really see, but we know are out there and don't want to allow the underdog to have a voice. And so I'm going to, just do their bidding and keep everyone else down. Rance has to overcome that. And it turns out the only way to overcome that is through an act of violence. But it in the end, it's not even his act of violence. It's the act of violence of Tom, who is kind of the counterpoint to Rance. He's not the educated one. He's not standing for civilization. He's kind of represents more the old West ways of, toughness and asserting yourself and staying free by the point of a gun. And so, yeah, I don't know. For me, it's not like the movie shifts. It's that the movie is revealing what it's actually about and the questions that it's actually posing. But it just sounds like you're not as interested in what the questions are that the movie is actually interested in.
Yeah, I just don't. I don't. I'm not interested in Western stories of here's a bad guy who shoots guns and terrorizes people and we need to take him down and he's bad. Because I think that it would have been different with this movie in particular. And honestly, I would love to hear your opinion on this because maybe you see more to him than I do. But I feel like Liberty Valance is really not a well-rounded character at all. I feel like we don't know anything about him beyond he's just a bad guy who likes to hurt people, and he gets joy out of hurting people and intimidating them. I think that we can make assumptions about who he is and why he's doing what he's doing, but I just find that that's not well established. And at the same time, I don't know. I just felt like Rance and Hallie, they were both very well rounded. And then I found Liberty Valance as well as Tom to not be well rounded. I felt like the whole beginning of the movie, we're introduced at this funeral, or I guess before the funeral happens, but everyone is really upset about their friend who's died, who we don't know who it is. And then we know by the end that the person who dies is Tom. And that didn't move me at all, because I was like, I feel like Tom's friendship and his impact on these people was not really established at all, because I don't know. I just felt like it wasn't earned for me. The whole him going into his house to commit suicide, I was just like, I don't even know enough about you to care why this is happening. I just felt like the movie had so much potential to, I don't know, just go. I wish that it had gotten rid of all of the Western stuff in the second half and spent that time really diving into the characters and their psyches and motivations and just making them more complete as characters. And I wonder if you felt like, A, if any of that was lacking for you, and B, if so, like, why do you think that it's that way, or why does it not bother you as much? I don't know. Like, do they feel like well-rounded characters to you? Because to me, I feel like they're just stereotypes of like, this is the bad guy, and then this is the friend who was initially the bad guy, but then he changes his mind and becomes good at the end. And I don't know. I don't know. It just, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a legitimate question. I mean, well, I think part of that answer for me goes into what do I like about what about the Western genre. And for me, what I really connect to about at least Westerns of this era, I think later Westerns, like you were talking about, True Grit, Assassination of Jesse James, which I know you haven't seen, things more recently are doing something a bit different. But for me, Westerns of this era they're fables. They are fantasy stories, they are stories that are kind of abstract and are using archetypes, but in order to tell a specific story and to explore specific themes. So for me, when you say Liberty Valance is not a well-rounded character, he's just a bad guy, I say, well, Sauron is not a well-rounded character. He's just a bad guy.
How
he just
dare
exists
you?
to corrupt and hurt people. And that's
actually
okay.
That's not true. There is a lot of backstory to Sauron
well, yes,
in the books.
if you're
I'll
going to
just
go
say
and
that,
read the lore and read the Silmarillion, sure. And you can write all sorts of fanfic about Liberty Valance's backstory and what got him into it. But in the context of the story, sometimes if the story you're going to tell needs a bad guy and they're just going to be a bad guy, that's okay. We need a force who is the force of chaos, the force of corruption, the force of standing against what the heroes represent, and that allows the heroes to then bring out the qualities that they have, and to make choices. And yeah, sometimes you don't need the bad guy to have, a complex story of, my parents hurt me and that's why I grew up like this, or
my mother's
maybe
pearls.
I also play the violin and so I have complexity or something like. And not to dismiss all of that, like, there are great stories where the idea of the bad guy is complicated, but this is not a story where it's trying to show all of these shades in its bad guy. This is a story where there is a guy who is a bully, and he's hurting people and he needs to be stopped, and no one is able to stand up to him. And so these two characters are put into the position where they do need to stand up to him, and the ways in which that happens and what it causes as a result is what brings the interest in this movie.
brings the interest for some people.
Yeah. Brings me the interest.
To me, it provides zero interest at all, but that's okay.
Yeah. I was thinking maybe we would do a little bit more of the plot of this movie than we often do in our
Sure.
conversations, just because this is a movie that it's from 1962. It's by no means obscure. I mean, this is a pretty well-known John Wayne, John Ford movie, but still I thought it might be helpful to just go through the plot a little bit more.
Can I just say that John Wayne is very tall?
He is yes, he was
I was
famously
watching
a
this
very
movie and I
tall
was
man.
like, he is towering over everyone. It's like,
Jimmy
dang,
Stewart
son.
also not short. Jimmy Stewart is quite tall, but
But
John
Jimmy
Wayne just
Stewart,
like absolutely a massive presence, which I think
well,
is
Jimmy Stewart doesn't have the tall hat, and
true.
he's also a little bit more lanky.
He
Whereas
stoops a little
John Wayne's
bit.
like he's like a
Hmm.
bulky guy
Yeah.
with a huge hat on.
Yeah.
Like, dang,
Yeah.
you're
I mean, he's
huge.
a movie star present. Like, this is why this man was a movie star for 50 years. Like, he's not the greatest actor in the world, as you've probably noticed, but he just has this presence that, he just absolutely hulks over everyone else. And yeah, he's just hard to take your eyes off when he's on screen. Um, yeah, so to start going through the plot a little bit, so this movie starts with a framing device, which is Jimmy Stewart, who's playing this character, Ransom Stoddard, Rance, as he's called to his friends, and then Vera Miles playing Hallie. The two of them married years, decades after the action of the story, are returning back to the town, which is called Shinbone. I don't think we know what state it takes place, but um, they are greeted by this reporter on the train station. The reporter's like, "Hey, what are you doing back here? Jimmy Stewart's or Rance, I should say. Rance is a senator. He's off doing important things." And they're all very confused about why he's returning home to Shinbone. But it turns out that he's here to attend a funeral. And the funeral, no one seems to know much about it. It's not very well attended. Doesn't seem like this person is very well remembered in this town. But it turns out that the funeral is for Tom Donovan. Um, and the reporters are asking him, why are you coming back to visit this guy's funeral? What's going on? What's your history with him? So Rand starts to tell the story, which ends up being the story of this movie. Do you have any thoughts just on this opening scene? Um,
Yes, I think that Jimmy Stewart's acting as an old man is insane. Like, he takes his voice and multiplies it. I mean, he just doubles down.
he really
was
does,
talking.
yeah.
He was talking, and I was just like, what is this choice? Please, I hope you're not talking like this the whole movie. And then he stopped, obviously, when they had the flashback. And then I was like, wow, his old man voice is it's a little intense.
It's like how when, maybe a Southern person, as they get older, they become more Southern or something like that. It's
Yeah,
just like
right. Yeah.
the accent just really goes to town. I feel like he also, which you see this a little bit more toward the end of the movie, but he also has this sort of politician mode that he goes into. And so he'll be talking to people and he's like, "Oh, yes, I'm so glad to be in this town. And I'm going to write to the railroad and tell them how great you treated me." But then when he goes to talk to Hallie, his whole voice and demeanor kind of softens, and it's like he's going in and out of politician mode because he's so used to being this like big shot politician who's hobnobbing with all the Hollywood government bigwigs. But then when he's with his wife, he can be a little bit more of a normal person.
Yeah.
Anyway,
And I also loved his very heavily caked on,
yes,
like, old person white hair. I
Mhm.
mean, I was like, dang,
Yeah,
wow.
intense. Yeah, the old person,
It
1962 era old person makeup
looked like
on
he
both of
just
them.
dipped his head in a bowl of powder. It was crazy.
It's probably not far from what they did. I don't know what it was like at the time, but all right.
But yeah, I mean, those
Mhm.
are my only thoughts on the beginning. Just the initial impressions of Jimmy Stewart. It's like, wow, this is Jimmy Stewart like I've never seen him before, and I don't know if I like seeing him like this.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's very much Jimmy Stewart in like big shot mode. He's the
Right.
famous senator, governor guy who's like suddenly showing up in the middle of nowhere, and everyone's like, wait, what's going on? Also, these reporters are extremely nosy about why he's showing up in town. They're like, our people have a right to know why you're here. He's like, do they? Anyway. All right, so he starts telling the story. So basically, when Ransom first arrived in Shinbone as, well, he's supposed to be kind of a kid fresh out of law school. Jimmy Stewart was like 50 something when he made
Yeah, he
this.
does
He
not
does
look
not
that
look
young at
like
all.
a young man. But we've got to suspend disbelief, and it's fine. So as he's arriving into Shinbone, his stagecoach is held up by Liberty Valance, who is an absolute jerk. Steals jewelry from this woman, terrifies everyone. Rance starts to
A woman
threaten
who we
him.
never see again, by the
Mm-mm,
way.
yeah, no, she's just another stagecoach passenger.
Like, what?
Yeah. Rance is like, I want to see you taken down by the law. And because of that, Liberty Valance just absolutely beats the shit out of him. Rance is taken into town. He's cared for by Hallie. John Wayne, I think, is the one who brings him into town. Um, Basically, Rance learns that Liberty Valance is the guy who takes him down, who had robbed him. Uh, Rance is determined to see that he is dealt with by the law. Rance is a recent lawyer, and he wants to set up a practice. He wants to make sure everything is above board. He wants to bring democracy and freedom into this town. And everyone's like, nah, you're crazy. That the only way that anyone can deal with Liberty Valance is with a gun. And the sheriff of this town, we learn, is just kind of a huge coward, and he won't confront Liberty Valance in any sort of way. Any thoughts on this opening? Rance meets Hallie, who is working at the local restaurant. She's a very sweet, but also very smart, independent-minded woman, and the two of them kind of have a little bit of a connection. Hallie sort of feels for Rance and is kind of, yeah, really interested and attracted to his the fact that he is an educated person, the fact that he wants to um, bring the law into this town. She's sort of being courted by John Wayne's character, Tom Donovan, who is a rancher in the area. Tom is a very like kind of rough, sort of plain speaking. He's no one wants to mess with him. He's just kind of yeah, kind of a representative of the old West in a way. So he's been courting Hallie, but Hallie's not quite sure about whether she wants to be with him or not. Yeah, any thoughts on this sort of initial few scenes?
Yeah, I've got a few actually. Aside from the fact that John Wayne looks like he's 7 feet tall.
Absolutely.
So one of the things that I noted was I'm assuming that this was a direct influence, but maybe not. I don't know. But the whole scene where Rance is working in the diner now and walking out to the front and giving people their food, and people are kind of just making fun of him a little bit and all that stuff. It
Mm-hmm.
reminded me a lot of The Power of the Dog.
Yes.
When oh crap, whose character is
Yeah,
it?
Cody Smith McPhee's character. I'm forgetting the name of him.
Is it? Yeah. Like he's coming out and serving them food, and
Mm-hmm.
then Benedict Cumberbatch's
Yeah.
character is like just really really ragging on him a
Yeah. Well,
lot.
in
Uh,
Liberty Valance, there's a thrown off line about how basically the idea of being a waiter, serving food in this restaurant at this time is considered to be women's work. And so for Jimmy Stewart to agree to it is kind of like, wait, what do a man is going to serve food? Like that's so degrading or something, which is why then when Liberty Valance comes in, he's kind of poking fun at Jimmy Stewart. So sorry, continue.
um, but yeah, so I noticed a connection there. I would be
Mm-hmm.
curious to hear if Jane Campion specifically was calling back to that, or if it's just a common thing that's seen in these types of Wild West movies. But yeah, and then I also Yeah, I also noted that I feel like the dynamic between Tom and Hallie feels a little bit like Belle and Gaston in the Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah, I
Of
can see it.
except the opposite being that in this Hallie literally can't read and Belle reads like a million books. But it just felt very much so like she's this very intelligent woman who's kind of independent and in her own world, and then this guy who's like, oh, well, I will have her because she's the one for me and blah, 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 blah. I mean, that's a very loose connection, but I felt
Yeah,
like
I mean, Tom
it
is
just,
not a Gaston. He's much, he really thinks he's gonna be able to win Hallie, but he's not like as much of a jerk about it as Gaston is. He's not really like, oh, I deserve her because I'm the best or anything like that.
right. Yeah. I mean, he gives her up with grace,
Yeah.
which I appreciate. But initially that was kind of, it just was something that came into my mind. And then this sequence is the one with the steak, right? Where they're like serving steak to people. I wrote down that the steak looks freaking nasty. Like I am not eating that steak. I'm pretty sure all of them are going to get food poisoning because that steak is freaking raw. Like that is as a prop buyer, I'm just like, who bought
I was
that
gonna
steak?
say, as a prop
Where'd that steak
buyer,
come from? That looks gross.
was that steak probably sitting under hot lights for like 6 hours before they were able to film with it?
I don't know. It literally looks like it's made out of rubber. It just looks disgusting. And they kept showing it, and I just was like, please stop showing that on camera. It's disgusting. But yeah, I mean, I think another thing that I'll just note from this section is I found the acting in this movie. I found the acting in this movie to either be obnoxious or just not moving at all. I felt like characters were either flat or they were so over the top that I was like, will you please stop talking? And so I feel like we're introduced to a lot of very just crazy characters. You know, you mentioned the sheriff who is just really annoying. I mean, I understand what they're trying to do with him. I get it.
He's sort of a
but
comic relief
it's
character.
a bit much. And kind of Liberty Valance's henchmen, I think, are incredibly obnoxious. The reporter's kind of annoying. I just, kind of going back to what I said in the beginning, I feel like none of these characters, other than Hallie and Rance, I feel like none of these characters are people. They're just caricatures that are there to just be a person who's that type of person. And it just, it annoys me.
Yeah, that's all right. And that, I mean,
but
that is the definition of an archetype.
Yeah. And then I guess the last thing I have to say about this section is Jimmy Stewart. I think he's a great actor, but man, sometimes he just says things. I'm like, dude, take it down a notch. And there's this sequence where he finds out that Hallie can't read, and she's like, what, do you think I could actually learn? He's like, what? Well, sure. You can. I'm like, dude,
he's so excited.
I mean, he is so enthusiastic about teaching this woman how to read, and not in a way that's like, oh, I like her and now I get an opportunity to spend more time with her, but in a way that literally makes no sense. Like, no one would be that excited about telling someone that they're able to read.
He just loves education. What can I tell you?
So in that specific moment, he definitely made me laugh because I was like, Jimmy, I love you. Tone it down a bit. Like, this is a bit much.
That's funny.
But yeah, I guess that's kind of all I have to say about the beginning. Like, I don't have anything super profound to say other than just, I think, I just found the acting in this movie. I think my three favorite performances were Jimmy Stewart, and then the woman who plays Hallie, and then the man who plays Pompey. I think that the three of them give very strong performances.
Yes. Which shout out to,
it's not.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say shout out to Woody Strode who plays Pompey. He, I guess I went down a mini rabbit hole while I was researching for this episode because I was very struck by him. He is great in this movie. He was a he was a friend of John Ford's and apparently was in several of John Ford's movie. He'd actually been the lead of a previous John Ford movie called Sergeant Rutledge, which I've never seen, but now I really want to see. But he had originally been an athlete. He was a one of the first pro black football players. He'd helped to integrate pro football in America, and I think he did some other sports as well. He may have gone to the Olympics. I'm not 100% sure about that, but yeah, he was an athlete turned actor. Obviously, an incredibly striking presence, and yeah, definitely would be interested in checking out more of his work because he's a really striking screen presence.
He's also in Spartacus. I don't think you've seen that
Oh,
movie.
no,
But
not
I
the
was
whole way
watching
through.
this. I was watching this and I was like, why is that face familiar? And then I looked it up and then I realized, oh, that's the guy from Spartacus.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Um,
Yeah,
but
I need to finish watching that movie. I've seen the start of it. I need to watch the rest of it.
Stanley Kubrick, man, he knows what he's doing.
Man
But
knows where to put a camera.
he does. Doesn't necessarily know how to treat people well on set, but you know,
Yeah, sadly you could say that for a lot of
another
directors, including
another
John Ford.
conversation for another day.
Yeah.
We
Anyway,
should just
sorry
have
I
a whole
interrupted your
podcast.
point
We
about
should just
the.
have a whole podcast episode dedicated to just talking about the struggles of loving the art that's
Mm,
made by filmmakers that are actually really, really shitty people.
yep.
Because there's a lot of them. A lot of
Yep.
them.
Yep. You could probably count more the directors who are not completely shitty to their casting crew.
Mm, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, but yeah, I think I was just saying before that aside from those three characters or those three performances, it's not that the rest of the performances are bad per se. I just think that they're just flat for me. It's like they exist just to exist and move the story along. Whereas it's like I'm not interested in them. They're just there. Whereas Pompey, Hallie, and Rance, I'm genuinely invested in them as people. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, what did you think actually about, well, I'll explain a little bit more about this and then ask what you thought about it. So, as you mentioned, Tatum, Jimmy Stewart Rance, I should stop saying Jimmy Stewart. Rance starts working in the restaurant, and then as he's trying to set up his law practice, he starts working in the office of the local newspaper, which is the Shinbone Star, alongside its editor, Dutton Peabody, who's an alcoholic, but basically a decent guy who, he wants to be reporting the news and bringing important stories to the people of Shinbone, but that job is often complicated by the fact that when he reports the news, powerful people who have Liberty Valance on their payroll tend to get mad. But while that's happening, yeah, so he sets up a school, he starts teaching Hallie, he starts teaching children and adult from all over, not just how to read, but also just the principles of democracy and the rule of law. And yeah, voting and the fact that people theoretically should have equality and each should have an equal voice. But Liberty Valance and his backers are not happy about that and threaten to shut them down. And Tom and Rance several times are clashing over the best way to handle these threats from Liberty. So Tom is of the opinion the only way to handle him is through a gun. And Rance keeps saying, no, 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 I want to bring law. We shouldn't just be killing people. I really want to do this by having him arrested, by having him tried. I want to do this through the proper channels. But Tom is like, no, 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 you're out west. You can't expect any of that to happen. So finally, what happens is Hallie learns that Rance has been secretly going off and he's got himself a gun and he's been doing target practice. So she tells Tom. Tom brings him over to his ranch and gives him a shooting lesson. They also kind of talk about Hallie because Tom has realized that Hallie and Rance are kind of interested in each other. And he's like, Hallie's my girl. And Rance is like, I know. Um, so yeah, any thoughts on this section, but also curious about the character of Dutton Peabody and what you think about him. He's the editor of the local newspaper.
Mm, okay. Um, Well, I'll start with the Dutton Peabody question because I feel like that's a much shorter answer of I don't really feel anything towards him at all. So I don't know if there's something there specifically that you want to touch on.
Yeah, just I
But
really liked his character. I liked his dynamic with Rance. He's this character who's a little kind of a sad character in that you can tell that he and Rance are sort of kindred spirits, but before Rance has come, he's kind of been a lone island in this town. You know, he has this trade which is creating and selling a newspaper, but no one really wants it because the idea of literacy and education and law has been completely disregarded until now. And so, because of that, he's kind of depressed and he's an alcoholic. But when Rance comes, he kind of offers this hope that maybe something can change, maybe something can be a little bit different. And yeah, I just really enjoy their dynamic together. You know, he's a little bit scared, but Rance is always pushing him towards no, we've got to we've got to do what we can. We've got to help these people. We've got to show them a better way. And it doesn't always end well for him, as we will talk about. But um, there is a kind of a noble potential to him that Rance is able to bring out.
yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, other thoughts about this section of the movie about Rance and Tom's dynamic, or uh, Rance's the school that he's leading, things like that.
Yeah, I think the school portion of the movie is what bothers me so much about this movie
Mm-hmm.
because I thought it was going in this direction
Mm-hmm.
and it should have gone in this direction, but it didn't. Yeah, I think the school scene is my favorite sequence in this whole film. I think that there is a lot of completely unashamed, explicitly stated just statements against racism and
Mm-hmm.
against sexism and against classism. And for 1962, from a white man, I feel like also from a white man who a lot of people watch his movies, I feel like this was a real risk for
Mm-hmm.
him. Um, but I thought that, I mean, there were some very beautiful things in here. I thought that, and honestly, for me, coming from the year 2023, it was really moving to hear someone actually talking about, um, the, gosh, what is it? It's not the, I was thinking the Ten Commandments. It's not the Ten
It's not the Ten Commandments.
the Constitution, like
Mm-hmm.
the and having someone read it with such conviction as if it's something that actually matters and something that actually provides hope. Because I feel like nowadays it's like the Constitution, no one follows it and it sucks and there's all these flaws and it's not going to change, but we need to change it, but we can't do that, blah, blah, blah. Like there's all of this baggage on the Constitution. And I think there was then as well. But I just liked how this character in this scene, there was no baggage with the Constitution. It was just like, this is what it should be. All men are created equal. Like all people are created equal.
Mm-hmm. A very
And
explicit choice to have that those words be stated by the Woody Strode character, who is black, and him being talked through it, and so Rance being so encouraging and so yeah, like really um yeah, like really affirming his right to be there and his his choice to learn about it and to get the opportunities that education offers. Like it is, you can tell it's a very explicit choice by the screenwriter and director, and I do think it's a really beautiful moment.
And there wasn't just support from Rance either. It
Mm-hmm.
like Pompey would say something, then the man sitting next to him would reach up and give him like a an arm tap of camaraderie. Like he was supported by everyone in that
Mm-hmm.
room. And he had a place there and he was welcome there. And same with Hallie too. I just thought that it was really great how there were all these people in this town. First of all these people that can't read, which in and of itself is really sad. But then Rance creating this environment where he is genuinely like, this felt like a real classroom. It felt like an actual teacher who's passionate about what they do. And because he was kind of telling people when they were wrong, of just like, no, that's not what it is, but then correcting them in a way that was gentle, but also, just, I don't know. I just
Yeah,
thought that
he's
this,
such a
I
good
thought that
teacher.
this, I thought that this scene was beautiful, and I really thought that the film was going to go in the direction of this is the type of justice that is needed. The type of justice that is needed is providing equality, providing literacy, providing education to people who are of lower class or a different race or a different gender or whatever. And then maybe liberty is going to come in and start fighting against that, and then that's going to be the core of the problem. And maybe it was, but I
Yeah.
felt like it didn't deliver on that, because we never saw it. Just became Rance versus Liberty Valance, and I didn't care about that justice. I don't care about the justice of putting Liberty Valance down. I don't care about that justice. I care about the justice of getting all of these other people the equality that they deserve. And so, yeah, I loved this sequence. Unfortunately, I don't think I can talk about it as much because to the listener, Geneva and I watched this a week ago. We were supposed to record last week, but it didn't happen for personal reasons. And so I'm a week removed from watching this film, so I don't remember all the specific details of what happened in this sequence. But I do remember that I really, really enjoyed it. And because this scene was so strong and really moved me, it really disappointed me that the movie did not continue down this path, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So,
I would argue that the movie is continuing down this path. It's just that we don't see the classroom specifically anymore because none of the rest of the plot needs to take place in the classroom. But I think one of the reasons that Liberty Valance needs to be taken down is because of the opposition that he represents against that, against education, against giving people a voice and a vote. I mean, a big plot in the second half of the movie is these elections that are happening, which is the people voting to elect delegates who will then be sent to discuss the possibility of statehood. And what statehood represents is the bringing of complete law and order, which by implication also brings about, government protections and mandates for education and yeah,
doesn't
protections
that
for
happen? Doesn't that happen after Valance is dead, though?
the convention at the after Valance is dead is, I believe, all of the elected delegates then go to a convention where they're going to, I'm not 100% sure. I think they're going to discuss statehood there, or they're electing a representative who's then going to go to discuss statehood. I'm not 100% sure, like, what each event is meant to represent, but there is an important election that happens in the town that Valance is opposing because he and specifically the wealthy ranchers who pay him are against it because that would threaten their own interests to have um, to have there be some sort of rule of law and to have the interests of the underdog, the smaller people, the smaller ranchers or everyday people, to have those be backed by the rule of law. So yeah, I would argue in the language of the movie, the whole point is that we want to be moving towards what Rance is able to set up, this sort of school, this atmosphere of people being able to be to learn and grow and have protections. It's just that we're not spending any more time in the school because rebalance is the thing that threatens against it, and we need to have that sort of narrative slash moral confrontation with Liberty Valance. But
And I don't think we need to. I don't think we need that at all. I think like this this should have been a different movie. Take Liberty Valance
well, see,
out of
here we
it.
have
Like
the fundamental
he
thing.
he is not needed. And even everything that you're saying of he's representing these other ranchers and it's a threat to them, blah, blah, I'm like, we don't see any of that. We just see Liberty Valance show up and he's like, I don't like this. I'm going to hurt you. And it's like, why? I feel like we could have gotten that same dynamic of the ranchers over there don't like what's going on and they're going against the education of these people. And now we're going into court and electing these leaders. I feel like we could do all of that and get rid of the Western thing of Liberty Valance and we're having a shootout in the center. I'm like, we don't need that. The movie, and this is just my own personal opinion, but you're saying we need Liberty Valance. I'm like, we don't need him at all. Like, the movie would benefit from getting rid of him as a character and doing what it already wants to do. Because it sounds like, and tell me if I'm misinterpreting, but it sounds like you're saying that Liberty Valance is a character that's needed in order to like move this story forward and really help solidify the points that the movie is trying to make of like justice versus injustice in this struggle. And he's needed in order to propel that forward. And I don't think he's needed at all. I think that you could get rid of him and get rid of all of the Western stuff and still get to that point of communicating the same messages and the same themes, but in a more interesting way. But that's for me because I don't like the Western format, that I'm like, we don't need that. It's unnecessary. But for people who like the Western format, they're like, no, that is necessary because it works for me. So I'm like, I want this to be a different movie. And because I don't like Westerns, and people who like Westerns want this movie to be what it is because they like that type of tool bag that the Westerns use. So I think that's my main but that's my main issue with this film of I wish it was
You wish it was fundamentally a different movie than what it is.
Yeah. I wish it,
Sure.
I don't think fundamentally a different movie because I think I like the themes that it's stating. I like the message. I like what it's fighting for. I like what the movie is trying to say. So I don't think it needs to be something fundamentally different. I think the fundamentals are great. It's just this main character, I don't get him out of here.
I would argue, especially considering the movie is called The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, the character of Liberty Valance is pretty darn important.
I guess, but
because
I don't
that
know.
is that question of who shot him and what
I don't care.
I
don't care.
Is like sets up a huge portion of what the movie is fundamentally saying.
I don't care. Not that I don't care what you're saying, but I don't care who shot Liberty Valance. And also in that sequence when Liberty Valance was shot, I knew who shot him. It wasn't like, oh, who did it? Oh my gosh, Rance did it. Whoa, it actually was Tom. It's like, no, Tom was freaking hiding around the corner and he shot Liberty Valance. I already know that.
Right.
Like, I don't know. I don't care who shot Liberty Valance because Liberty Valance is boring. Like, I don't know. What if the story was instead like, who gave the people of the town a voice or something like that? Like, because then the movie is more centered on Rance, whereas instead of Liberty, which also his name's Liberty, which I feel like was someone trying to be witty. And I'm like, ugh, okay, cool.
Yeah,
let's be witty and call him Liberty. Like, well, okay,
yeah, it's the delicious irony of that.
Does
Liberty
Valance mean something?
Bring liberty.
Does Valance mean anything?
I mean, there's curtain balances. I don't know if that's spelled the same way, but
okay, because I'm curious if Valance means something. Let me see.
Yeah, I'm not sure if a curtain valance is spelled with an E or an A. But yeah, I mean, I think the fundamental problem is that you don't like what the movie is trying to do,
and
you don't like the Western genre. So
we knew this going in. So
we did.
Yeah, I'm trying my best here. I liked the movie. I just didn't like the Western parts, which happens to be a large portion of this film in the second half.
It is. Yep. All right. So let's see, where were we? So there's elections that are happening in this town. Rance, basically, he's brought in to run the meeting. He gives this rousing speech about why we want to be working towards statehood, because statehood offers all of these opportunities and protections for everyone. Rance nominates Tom as a delegate, but Tom refuses. So Tom is out. Liberty Valance shows up. He tries to get himself elected, but Rance is basically able to with his voice, the crowd is empowered to shout down Liberty's election, and instead they nominate both Rance and Peabody, the editor, to be the two representatives from the town for the statehood conversations. So Liberty's infuriated by this, and he basically challenges Rance to a duel. He just says, we're going to meet tonight, and I'm going to kill you. So Tom and basically everyone Rance knows is saying, you need to get out of town right now. Liberty is totally going to murder you. And Rance is like, no, 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 no. Liberty goes to the newspaper office and finds Peabody there. He and his men really rough up Peabody, like basically beat him to within an inch of his life.
Yeah, I thought he was dead
I thought
until
he
they
was
were
dead at
like, "Oh
first
wait,
too.
no,
Yeah,
he's
he's
not.
not quite dead, but very close to it.
He's mostly dead."
He's mostly dead. Mostly dead. All dead. Um, but yeah, it's horrible. Rance finds Peabody and is yeah, just furious. So he gets his gun, he heads out to meet Liberty, and there's a confrontation between the two of them. Some really beautiful lighting. I really, really love the way that this scene was shot and the use of shadows and highlights during this sequence. But basically, Liberty shoots at Rance a couple times. He hits him in the arm at one point. He's just kind of playing with him. Rance is struggling to stay alive, basically. Finally, Liberty goes to shoot Rance. He goes in for the kill, but Rance shoots and Liberty falls over dead. And everyone runs out into the street. Hallie tends to Rance's gunshot wound. Tom shows up and he sees Hallie tending to him, and he realizes, yeah, Hallie is no longer my girl. She has feelings for Rance. So he goes back to the saloon. He gets drunk, he goes home and tries to burn down his house with himself inside it to kill himself, but Pompey rescues him.
So is he? I was confused about this in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Did he attempt to commit suicide literally just because Hallie chose Rance instead? Or is there something else going on there?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I think the idea is that he's not a very happy person, and he's just put all of his hopes on the idea that um, I'm gonna marry Hallie, and he's been building this room for her. He's been thinking, we're gonna live here together, and that's gonna be the rest of my life. And then seeing Rance come in, who probably represents something that he kind of maybe not, something that is very much not who he is, someone who has what he can never offer. That kind of brings up all these feelings of loneliness and self-loathing, and particularly, with the context of knowing that Rance is now being celebrated for something that Tom, in fact, did, which Tom does not want to reveal to anyone else, but it still, I think, makes him feel depressed. And so, yeah, he tries to kill himself, but Pompey rescues him, prevents him from dying.
I feel like I don't feel the pain there because I feel like the relationship between him and Hallie was not established. I don't believe that Tom was that upset to the point that he was going to kill himself, because we don't ever see, in my opinion, any sort of deep connection between the two of them or any sort of profound one-on-one. There isn't really anything that happens that really establishes them as a couple or as something where they have a future together. And yes, I think it's talked about, but I feel like I don't see enough to actually, like, I remember when I watched this and he was going to his house to burn it down, I was like, I feel like I'm supposed to be feeling something here. But first of all, I didn't even understand that the reason he was killing himself was because he was upset about Hallie, because I didn't even realize that he cared that much, because I felt like their relationship wasn't established. But now that you're saying that, I'm like, that emotional, that emotional movement that it's asking for, I feel like is not deserved, because it doesn't lay enough groundwork for that to have the impact that it's asking for, at least in my opinion. But that's because, I mean, I struggle a little bit more with being engaged with romances if they're not believable to me. And this movie, the romance between the two of them is not believable to me because I don't see it throughout the movie anywhere. Mm-hmm. And therefore, I'm like, why are you killing yourself over a romance that's stupid? But not stupid. I don't think that it's stupid. I just don't think it's established. So I don't care about it.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, I think for me,
because they establish it even in the beginning of like, oh, let's go to this house and it's so sad. We're seeing these flowers on the ground and oh no, I can't go. I'm just like, I don't know. I found Tom's character to be so flat. He's just someone who exists to do the things, but I don't have any emotional connection to the things that he does.
Yeah. Well, to me, Tom's character is very much a tragic character. I mean, he's a character who's very difficult to like in certain ways, because he is that more hardened, rough and tumble cowboy. He doesn't have the culture or the education of Rance. He's prickly. He can be he's definitely anti-progressive, maybe a little bit racist. Like he's very against Pompey getting an education because he's like, no, you're supposed to be working for me. He is a character who is very much sort of stuck in the past and doesn't really have a future in this new world that Rance is building. And I think you see throughout the film that she has affection for him, maybe she feels a little bit sorry for him, but she doesn't feel the same way about him that he feels about her. And so when their relationship is brought up, it's usually Tom saying, we could go out and take a drive, or, he shows Rance like, oh, I'm building this room for her when we eventually get married. He really loves her, but she does not feel the same way about him. It's not a mutual romance. I almost hesitate to call it a romance because it's very much one-sided. She doesn't hate him or anything like that. I think she views him as a friend, but she, fundamentally does not love him the way that he loves her. And so to me, what works about that sequence is the fact that it is this character who is he's kind of a tragic figure. He's very limited by his circumstances, by his personality, by his situation. And he's built up all of these hopes over this woman who really was never going to love him. And finally, he's seeing all of these hopes coming down, and she's going for the one man who represents and can give her all of these things that he's never able to give her. And that's just, kind of everything hitting at once. It just fills him with despair. And so, yeah, I do find him to be kind of a prickly character and one that can be hard to like at certain points. But I think he is also a tragic figure, and so I kind of feel sorry for him, even if he isn't the most likable or well-rounded in the same way that Rance and Hallie are.
I don't care if characters are prickly or unlikable. There's actually lots of things that I like. Breaking Bad, for example, Walter White is freaking prickly and unlikable, but I feel like I care about and am invested in his journey because
we're very different there because I do not care about Walter White at all.
Right.
But,
right.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
But like, I'm trying to say that like the reason that I don't connect with Tom is not because he's a quote unquote like unlikable character. Someone being an unlikable character does not prevent me from, being engaged with their story. I find that you saying that Hallie doesn't love Tom the way that Tom loves her, I don't see love from Tom for her, really. Like, I see that he's interested in kind of wanting to court her and have a relationship, but I don't see any sort of profound love there at all, especially not one that's going to lead him to kill himself because she chooses another man. And so I hear what you're saying, and I see and I understand why you are invested, but I also think that a lot of the things that you're saying that are moving you in that sort of way, I just didn't see that in the film at all. I find that for me, I felt like it was a lot of reading between the lines and adding in details that weren't actually there. And I don't know. It didn't. Tom as a character was just not well established for me. He just was like I said before, a person who existed and did things, and the reason he existed was to do things, and that's it. I'm like, okay, great, but I don't care. But
Sure.
at the same time, I do fully respect where you're coming from, and I do see your point of view, and I do see why you care. It just doesn't work for me. So this isn't me saying like, oh, well, how you're stupid in your analysis
I did
because
not
you're
think
blah, blah.
that's what you were
Like,
saying.
it's not me criticizing your perspective,
Right.
because I think that your perspective is valid. I just don't agree with, like, it's not
That's
that I
okay.
don't agree. I'm not making the same connections that you're making, because I feel like they're not there in my viewing. They're not there.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I feel like, again, the movie in the second half focuses on things that I really feel like you're focusing on this, but I don't care about. Like, why are we focusing on this romance? Like, I don't know. Anyway, I'm not gonna keep rambling. I the things that the film chooses to focus on in the second half, it's like, if you want to focus on it, then go all in. Don't just give us bits and pieces and all of a sudden, oh boy, this big thing happened. I'm like, if this is the point of the movie, then really go all in on it, and don't just like add different tacked on points to move the story along. Like, take me on a journey. Don't just, drop me somewhere and say, here you are, and then drop me somewhere else and say, well, here you are. I'm like, well, what is going on? Anyway.
Yeah. Yep. That's totally fine. Mm-hmm.
So one other thing I wrote down is because I think we're past this in terms of what you were saying
Sure.
in the plot summary. When Rance gets shot,
Mm.
he would have bled out and died. Let me just say, like,
He gets shot in the arm.
Well, didn't he get? Oh, well, yeah, I guess, but I feel like the way that he was bleeding and how long it took him to get to the other, I don't know. I was like, I feel like this feels a little, I don't know. I feel like he'd be in worse shape or something. I don't know.
I don't
Anyway,
know. I mean, people survive
that's-
getting shot in the arm all the time.
Yeah, that could be true. Did you, I forget, when you were kind of talking about just the plot of the movie and going through it, did you get to the like election speeches at the convention yet, or no?
No, we've not gotten there yet.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, we're just about to get there. Yeah. Did you have any other thoughts about the confrontation or anything else that happens prior to that?
I have a question,
Mhm.
which maybe you have a better understanding of this. I was a little bit confused as to the portrayal of Mexican people in this movie. I was like, I don't know if this is problematic or inclusive, because I don't understand, like, is the sheriff married to a Mexican woman and has Mexican, like, what?
Oh, is he? I didn't even remember that.
Because he talks about his
Yeah.
kids, and it sounded like, and then there's sequences. I don't know. I was just confused. I was like, I can't tell if this is the movie trying to be inclusive of, let's include Mexican people and just have representation, or if it was like, no, the Mexican people are just here to play music and blah, blah. I couldn't figure it out. I was like, I'm very uncomfortable because I don't know where I should stand on this.
I mean, in the case of a lot of classic Westerns, if you ask, is this inclusive? Is this problematic? I would say yes. Like,
It's most likely problematic.
It is both of those things. I mean,
Yeah.
again, and I've seen a fair amount of Westerns, but I would not say I've seen a huge amount, and it really can vary, I think, from film to film and from director to director, what they consider important, where their maybe personal politics are, / where the studio is at the time, whether there are stars who are, insisting on more or less inclusivity, things like that. Like it really can vary. I mean, Hollywood at this time, It is a very
Super inclusive, Geneva. I
it's
don't
a deeply
like.
complex issue. So
So, did you understand what their deal was
I
in this
mean,
movie?
I don't really remember specifically the sheriffs having a Mexican family. I would not be surprised. I mean, I don't think it would be unusual for like I mean in the context of the Western genre. I don't know about the history of this period, but I don't think it would be super um unusual in a Western movie to just casually show that a man who's not the main character, the sheriff of the town has married a Mexican woman and has some children with her. Like I don't think that would be super unusual. And I don't think
Okay.
I it's probably again, I don't remember exactly how this is portrayed because I don't think it's made a big deal of. I it probably would be the intention would be to include the fact that there is a Mexican presence in this town, but is probably generally separate from, kind of a subculture within this town that's not a huge presence in the field of vision of the main characters. So a
Mm-hmm.
little bit of inclusivity, but is not, clearly they're not telling this story from a Mexican perspective. So yeah, I would say,
Okay. I just wasn't sure if there was something that I was missing.
gotcha.
Of they established these people in some sort of way that I missed, or yeah, I just was
Yeah.
confused
No,
because
I
they
think
would
it's
just show
probably
up, and I
just,
was like, what,
yeah.
what? Like,
Yeah. Yeah, given my limited understanding of the Western genre at this time, it's probably just to establish, this is a town that has Mexican people within it. It's a pretty diverse town, but they're
and you know
probably
what
very much a
Mexican people
minority.
do? They just play mariachi music all the
All the
time.
time.
That's what Mexican people do.
Yep.
Yeah. Ugh. Okay, cool. I was just curious about that.
Sorry, you froze for a second.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. So, all right. So, next part of the plot. Rance and Peabody arrive at the territorial convention. So there is a um kind of long, possibly a little bit longer than it needed to be seen, that is basically just
Thank you for saying that. I wrote
this
down.
is the one
I
scene where I was
wrote
like, all right,
down.
maybe we can trim this down a little bit.
I had to fast forward it because I was like, this scene is so long. They have like a 3-minute introduction monologue for
Hmm.
each candidate. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh, my
It's
Lanta, please move on.
basically it is basic parodying slash poking fun at politicians, political practices, both of the time and then probably by extension of the time that the movie was made. So they have this guy who's nominated for Congress, and he has this mustache that looks exactly like Theodore Roosevelt, and he has this cowboy on a horse ride-in, and like everyone is, he gets up on stage and everyone's clapping, and they're like, "Settle down, this is ridiculous! Like, stop doing these crazy gimmicks." And yeah, so
This
I think
scene
they're
was
just kind
so
of
long.
poking fun at like, the entrenched Washington politicians who, play act at being men of the people and like, oh, I'm so close with the cowboys. Look at this cowboy who's coming in to stump for me and stuff like that. They have this guy who stands up, played by I think John Carradine is his name. He's a character actor of the time. He was in a couple other John Fords. He has this really great role in Stagecoach, but he just exists in this movie to give this long speech with these really long words. He's like, "Oh, I declare to all the people that," and
It
going off
feels
about.
like an SNL sketch
Yeah.
of like, I want to introduce the most important,
Yes, the
well,
most
the most
established,
important of the last
renowned.
10 years. He is renowned, he is special, he's done so much for us. He's done things like bring us clean water and bring us books. And did I tell you that? I'm like, oh my gosh, please stop. Please
Yeah, so
stop.
it's all meant to be kind of comedic, at least my assumption that it's all meant to be kind of, just comedic and like poking fun at what ridiculous blowhards politicians can be sometimes,
Right.
slash most of the time. Anyway, the upshot of it though is Rance is nominated to be representing them, I guess, in Congress as they're doing these like statehood conversations. And Peabody nominates him, and a big part of his, like, why this guy should be representing him is because he's this great champion of law and order. The railroad is coming and civilization's coming, and we need this guy who can, like, really stand up against the forces of chaos and represent, yeah, law. So Rance is really upset about this and uncomfortable, and he leaves the room. And Tom follows him. Tom is there as well. And Rance is basically like, I am, I'm being, like, the fact that I did this murder, that I killed Liberty Valance, is like, everyone is everyone wants me to build a whole life on this, and I don't want to do that. And Tom tells him, like, no, you didn't kill Liberty Valance. So we get a flashback to the confrontation. We see it from Tom's perspective. He steps in, he sees that Liberty's about to kill Rance, and he grabs his gun and he shoots at the same moment as Rance, and he kills Liberty. So back in the present, Tom tells Rance, everyone's depending on you. Hallie specifically is depending on you. You better go back in there and accept that nomination. So Rance does. He goes back in there, he accepts the nomination. We cut back to the present, which is Rance as an old man concluding his story to the reporters, and says basically, well, you know what happened next? I got elected, I was governor for multiple terms, I was senator, I was an ambassador to England. He's had this illustrious presidential career, he might be vice president next. And it's all based on this lie, which is that I'm the man who shot Liberty Valance, which I wasn't. But the editor rips up his story, and Rance is like, you're not going to publish it? And the editor says, this is the West. When the legend becomes fact, print the legend. So Rance and Hallie leave. On the train home, Rance suggests to Hallie, would you be interested in coming back to Shinbone to retire here? And Hallie's like, yeah, that would be great. I would really love it. And the railroad conductor comes by, and he's like, oh, Mr. Stoddard, like, Senator, we made all these special accommodations for you. We called ahead. You're going to be all comfortable on your trip back to DC. And Rance is back in politician mood. He's like, oh, that's fine. That's fine. But then at the very end, the railroad conductor says, oh, that's okay. Nothing is too good for the man who shot Liberty Valance. And so we hold on this guilty look that Rance gives, and then we cut to the train speeding off into the distance, and that is the end of the movie. So it was a large section of the movie that I just covered, but yes, Tatum, thoughts on this? I don't want to call it a twist ending, because obviously you guess what was going to happen, and I don't think it's really difficult to tell. I
No.
don't think it's necessarily intended to be a
I mean, the
twist.
fact that the title asks who shot Liberty Valance basically tells you that the man you think shot Liberty Valance is not the actual person.
I watched the trailer that's available on YouTube for this movie, and they pretty much spell it out. It's very easy to guess just based on that trailer alone. So yeah, I don't think it's necessarily intending it as a twist, but it does kind of have you reevaluate then what it means that he has gone on to have this illustrious career, and the fact that it happens this way, that it's based on this lie, basically, that everyone assumes that he's the man who shot Liberty Valance, and he's not, and he's never corrected that fact, and he's built his career on it. It does complicate his story, and complicates, who he is and what he's done, and yeah, which is, obviously that's not the story that you wanted the movie to be telling, but for me, that's one of the things I really love about this movie, is that this movie is not simple. It's not just a story of, this good man bringing education to the masses. Like, that's part of it, and that's great, but it's also complicated. The fact that he is this good man, but he's also chosen to, in part, base his career on a lie, and the fact that when they're confronted with the truth, the newspaper reporters specifically decide to ignore it and continue believing what has basically become this legend. And yeah, I just really like the complications of that. The fact that we base what we believe in, and so much about the way we are is based on these stories that we tell about ourselves, and what happens when those stories are not really true, and there is more happening that's under the surface. There are other people who are involved who've been swept to the side. What do we do with all of those things? So yeah, that's I really love the turn that this story takes, but I mean, I know that that wasn't the story that you were hoping that it was going to be telling.
Well, I find it super funny that you say that this movie's not simple. It's not just him bringing equality to the people of this town, but it's more complex because it's got all this da 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 da. And I'm like, all of the extra stuff that's added on is so simply stated that I feel like it adds nothing to the story. It's like, oh, he's done this thing and now his life is a lie, but he doesn't know. It's just, again, just dropping us in places and telling us this is where we are, as opposed to actually walking us through that journey. So I actually feel like that stuff is incredibly simple, and it would have been way more complex if he'd stayed in the town and we'd seen the intricacies of how is he going to teach these people and what impact is that going to have and how are they going to write. Like, I don't like where this movie goes. And I think, I don't know. I'm just someone where the particular types of stories that I like and the things that make me really excited about movies and about the stories that movies tell are movies that are very, like, they go really in depth on like the characters and their emotions and the very like slow evolving of how this emotion leads to this emotion and how that changes their personality and how it changes how they interact with, like, I like things where you'll take 2 hours to just learn about one person and like one thing that happened in their life. You take 2 hours to learn about one thing that happened in one person's life that happened over like the course of a day. I love that deep character study stuff. Whereas I feel like this is just the second half of this anyway. It doesn't linger on anything. It doesn't take the time to really walk you through that journey. It's just, this is where you are now. This is where you are. This is what happened. Now this is where you are. And so in that way, I actually found it to be very, I don't know if simplistic is the right word, because I don't think it's simplistic in the second half.
No, it's definitely not.
Like there's a lot going on. I just feel like it's told in a way that is very just matter of fact. There's no emotional nuance, which for me makes it hard to connect to, because for me it feels unrealistic, because life has all of these emotions and it takes a lot of time, and I don't know.
What do you
know.
mean when you say there's no emotional nuance? Just curious.
I just feel like, and again, this could literally just be because this is not my genre and it's not my cup of tea, and that's fine. But I feel like I don't connect with these characters at all, and there is no establishing of why. Like, I feel like Rance being ashamed that he's built his life on this lie is not shown. It's just like, oh, guess what? He's ashamed that his life is built on this lie. Or, oh, guess what? He is sad that his friend died. Or, oh, it's very just explicitly stated, and it's not really, it's not something to be felt for me. Like, it's not making me feel anything. It's just telling me what I'm supposed to feel. And so that's what I mean when I say like there isn't really emotional nuance, because I don't feel the conflict, the inner emotional turmoil. I'm just being told that it exists. And that doesn't connect with me because it feels unemotional. It feels fake. It feels like you're just telling me, but why would I believe what you're telling me if I haven't seen why I don't know. But that's just the difference in how people consume things and consume movies. And for me, the way that this story presents the emotional storylines does not work for me at all. And I feel like for me, in order to enjoy a movie, there has to be some sort of emotional attachment to it.
Yeah.
And once we basically leave the school, I'm not emotionally attached to anything that's going on. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
And
I
again,
think
that's not me like
no.
criticizing your perspective at all. Like
No,
I'm
I know.
not.
Yeah. I mean, I think again, this is just the case of this is not a movie, this is not your genre. This movie ended up wanting to tell a story that was different than the one that you wanted it to, which is totally fine. I wonder too, I mean, the fact that you're not as familiar with, obviously you've seen plenty of older movies, but you're not as familiar with the Western genre. You're not as familiar with, I guess, the nuances of kind of pacing and acting in older movies too. Like, you say that you don't connect to the characters, you're not feeling emotions, or emotional changes and nuances from them. I am feeling those things. So I think it's just a difference of perspective, um, in that sense, which is, fine. Different things connect to different people.
I will
You
say
connected to the
though,
characters of Pulp Fiction, which I did not. So, different people connect to different things.
I will say though, I don't think my lack of connecting to the characters in this movie is because I don't know how to connect with old movies. Like I don't think that that's true at all.
Yeah, no. I'm not like, obviously I know you have seen plenty and you're capable of connecting. I just think sometimes there can be like, there can be a distancing effect in a different style of pacing or a different style of acting that it can be really hard to get on the same wavelength with, if you haven't spent as much
Yeah.
time in that area.
I just don't think that that's what this is. I think it's just because again, like I said, with the westerns that I've seen that are more current, which would theoretically be more of a time period that I'm more comfortable with, the pacing or the acting or whatever, like I still don't connect with those stories.
Yeah, it's
And
true.
so I don't think it has anything to do with the time period. Like I love lots of movies that are from the 30s, 40s, 20s, 1912. Like I don't care about when movies come out. I can connect with anything regardless of what time period it comes in, unless it's like specifically like a racist movie like Birth of a Nation that came. I'm like, well, that's just straight up a
Hope that goes
problem.
without saying. Yeah.
But I don't think it has anything to do with the time period. I can connect with and appreciate old movies, and I've seen lots of movies that are older. I think it's just the Western genre and the stories that it's trying to tell and the ways in which it tries to tell them I don't connect with. And out of all the Westerns I've seen across the board, that's been true,
Yeah.
regardless of when it has come out. So I will defend myself in that area. Like, I don't think it has to do with the time period, because I have seen a lot of old movies and I have connected with a lot of old
Yeah.
movies.
Yeah, I
And
just
this
say that
movie
because
isn't even that old. It's from the 1960s.
no, yeah. No,
So,
I just say that because sometimes it can be a shock a bit to me where I will see a movie and I'm like, oh, they're really blowing through these plot points and these sort of emotional progressions of the character. Like, if it was a movie now, you would kind of stop and live in the moments a little bit longer than you would nowadays. But that's a product of just how movies were made back then, or what the
mhm,
expectations are. And it's not a matter of the movie being wrong, it's a matter of me needing to readjust my thinking
mhm,
to its wavelength and think, oh, the movie wants me to be teasing these things out rather than it
mhm.
explicitly laying these things out, because they had, run times tended to be shorter back then. They really had to get through, and so there was more of an expectation, I think. At least this is what I've assume is the case based on the things that I've seen, is that there's that need for the audience to be really like, yeah,
Mhm.
engaging with these things deeply and teasing things out, because the movie doesn't have the time to go into them in the same way it might today.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying. But I think that in this case, it has a lot to do with the fact that I just don't like westerns.
Yeah, I mean, we're
Like
already, at a
I don't.
disadvantage. Like, you're just not
Yeah,
interested in this
I'm
genre.
just not, for whatever reason. I don't know what it is, but Geneva, I need to. Well, no, I was gonna say I need to pick a movie that just doesn't work for you, but we just did. We did Pulp
We
Fiction.
did Pulp
So
Fiction, yeah. Yeah,
thank you
which
for
like,
hanging in
I
there.
think similar to today where it's like we can both find things that we really appreciate
Hmm.
and we can connect to certain elements about both of these movies.
Right.
They're not the movies for us, We're not
Yeah.
gonna fully connect to either of
Yeah.
them.
Like I said, I don't think this is a bad movie, and I think that, and maybe this hasn't been clear, but if it's not, I'll explicitly state it now. I think, or at least I've tried to communicate clearly, that a lot of my issues with this movie are just that I don't connect with it. It's not that it's poorly made. It's not that it's the acting is bad. I think it's over the top, but I don't think it's bad. Like I don't have any issues with the craft of the movie itself. It's just that I don't connect with it. So it
Mhm.
is purely a personal thing as opposed to objectively this movie does not. It's just like, no, it doesn't
Yeah.
work for me.
Yeah, and that's fine.
Um and I hope that I've communicated that clearly of like it's purely a personal thing and not like the film overall is just poorly made or the story is poorly written. I don't think that's the case.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right. Well, yeah, well, I think we've managed to have a really good conversation about that, It works
Yeah.
for
How
me,
do
it
you
doesn't work
feel
for you,
about
and
it,
that's
Geneva?
I
I hope you don't feel like I've torn you down or anything.
no, 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 no. Yeah, I love this movie. So anyone out there who's listening to this who also loves this movie, I stand
I'm
with
sure
you.
there's I'm sure
And if it
there's
doesn't
lots
work
of
for you,
people who
that's
love
that's
this
totally
movie.
fine.
There's lots of people who love this movie, I'm sure.
What'd you say?
I said there's lots of people who love this movie, I'm sure. I mean, there's a reason why this movie is like
It's
it's
like one of the
very
best on the
yeah,
list
so
of
it's
like
not
best
like
westerns ever made.
yeah, it's not like you're standing on a hill all by yourself
Standing
and
alone.
we're all it's like no, I'm pretty sure you're with the masses on this one, so
Yeah,
that's fine.
that's okay. Yeah, but yeah, I really do love this movie. I definitely don't disagree that some of the performances are really broad. But I really loved
Well, sure, you can learn to read.
I'm always gonna love Jimmy Stewart. No matter what he's doing. I think he and Hallie have a really sweet chemistry. Lee Marvin as a villain is really fun. I've only seen a few things with Lee Marvin, but he's always, yeah, he's got that really gravelly voice. We didn't really actually talk about Liberty Valance, apart from him being a flat. Finding him to be a very flat character, which yeah, there's not a lot of complexity to his character, but I enjoy him as a villain. Just he's just he just exists to be evil, and I think Lee Marvin does it really well.
Can I ask, do you also agree with me that it's really sad that Hallie like disappears in the second half? I wish that there was more of her. I feel like she just completely goes away until
I don't think the plot
because she's
doesn't.
such an integral part of the story, I feel like in the
Yeah,
beginning.
I don't. I didn't notice her going away, and I think it's because
Okay.
there are large chunks of the plot in the second half where there's no reason for her to be present. I mean, there's the entire confrontation scene. Obviously, she's not in that, and then the entire elections scene where Rance is nominated and he has that talk with Tom. Like, obviously, she's not present for that. So, yeah, when you say that, I'm like, yeah, she does disappear for chunks of it, but because the way that the narrative is going, I didn't notice it. And then she is very pivotal at the end. When it returns to the present day and the two of them are sitting on the train, and I don't know, I find it really interesting watching that last scene and watching her face and trying to parse how much does she know about this past, um, about what happened and what is she feeling now for Tom. Obviously there seems to be some sort of not regret, but kind of a lingering affection that she has for Tom because we find out she's left a cactus rose on Tom's coffin. So clearly she has some sort of wistful feelings for him and for how things went down. So yeah, I just find it really interesting to kind of parse her emotional journey through that and how she's felt over the last, 50 years or however long it's been, living with Rance and leaving Tom behind and knowing that she broke his heart. So yeah, I really love the Hallie character. She does, you're not wrong, she does disappear a bit from the plot, but I think her Vera Miles's performance is really dynamic, and so I just enjoy whenever she's on screen. I think she really stands out a lot.
Yeah, her and Pompey are my favorite characters. They're great.
Yeah, yeah. Are. Um, terms of this movie's um, legacy, so this movie, it was only nominated for one Oscar for Best Black and White Costume Design, which I found really interesting. I believe it
As
was,
opposed to color costume design?
mm,
Like, why?
yeah, a lot of these awards back at the time were split up between, there'd be like black and white versus color cinematography.
Interesting.
Yeah, which I mean, it makes total sense. Like you're
Yeah.
doing completely different work when you're designing costumes to be shot in black and white versus in color. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
I
I
kind of
mean,
like that.
yeah, yeah. I don't wouldn't say that I was specifically noticing the costumes in this movie, but it's kind of to me it's like just generic Western costumes, but they looked fine, so good for this movie. I pulled a couple of critics' thoughts. So interestingly, this Variety article from the time I think actually kind of agrees with you in a certain way, Tatum. So here, let me read you this quote. Director John Ford and the writers have somewhat overplayed their hands. They have taken a disarmingly simple and affecting premise, developed it with skill, craft, and skill to a natural point of conclusion, and then have proceeded to run it into the ground, destroying the simplicity and intimacy for which they have striven. And I think
Hmm.
specifically they were not crazy about the final turn that story takes, and
Hmm.
they felt like that kind of took away from the movie that it had been building to ever since. So, yeah,
Hmm.
any thoughts on that quote? Does that kind of reflect your feelings, or do you feel like you have different issues with the movie?
Um, I don't know. I'd honestly have to like read it a few times in order to. I mean, there's definitely certain sentences in it that I think that I would agree with, but overall, I feel like I'd have to read it a few times to really grasp its main points. So,
Gotcha.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So overall, I believe this movie was a critical and a box office hit, and it has very much grown in estimation ever since. So I found a 1978 Sight and Sound essay by David Corson online, which I found really fascinating. This is not so much a review as it is kind of a sort of a film studies critical essay on the film, and it makes some really interesting points about different motifs and themes and visual cues that Ford uses. But so I pulled out this quote that is kind of summing up some of the themes that I find really interesting in this movie. So this is David Corson writing for Sight and Sound. Like many Ford films, most obviously those dealing with the military, Liberty Valance focuses on the struggle to subordinate the individual to achieve some greater communal good. Liberty Valance, however, not only presents such a struggle to civilize the wilderness frontier, but explicitly shows the result, the modern town of Shinbone, and implicitly questions whether the sacrifices are justified. Then a little later, Ford undercuts his celebration of the mythic past with a corrosive revisionism that, far more than any lines of quotable dialogue, demonstrate his commitment to confronting and scrutinizing, rather than simply printing, the legend that is the subject of The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. So definitely kind of more an academic tone in that quote. Kind of had to read it a couple times to parse what he was saying, but yeah, I find those themes, this idea of the individual versus the common good, the idea of the the frontier versus the um, modern town, and the mythic past versus the actual future, and what we had to sacrifice or allied in order to get there. Just really scrutinizing and contemplating those sacrifices. Yeah, I just found that to be a really interesting theme in the movie. So yeah, in terms of what in the movie has moved me, has stuck with me. Yeah, to me, it's really just that theme that sort of as we move from the past into the present, we tell stories about the past, and we have to pick and choose what is true, and sometimes we um, change the way that we present the past, or we have to tell different stories in order to move ourselves forward. And so, what is gained through that? What are we able to achieve? But also, what is lost? I find those to be really interesting questions. So, Tatum, is there anything, obviously you're not a huge fan of this movie, but is there anything about this movie that you think is going to stick with you?
Yeah, that classroom scene, man. I mean, that
It's
was
great.
freaking profound. We need to make
Hmm.
our government officials watch that right now.
Mm.
Not just government officials, our entire nation needs to watch that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I found that scene to be very, very powerful. Again, I watched this a week ago, so I don't remember all the details of what happened in that sequence, so I can't speak to a lot of the specifics. But I love seeing African American people being treated with respect, and not just being treated with respect, but really being like pushed forward as
Hmm.
capable, intellectual human beings who deserve to be a part of the conversation. I love seeing that sort of representation, especially in 1962.
Hmm.
And
Absolutely.
I think that was a really powerful statement to make. And I really, really loved that scene. I genuinely loved that scene. And that was my favorite part of the movie. And I think, yeah, I feel like that's a scene that I would love to show, my niece or my nephew as they get older, to just like teach them about just equality of human beings. And yeah, I think it's powerful. So I'm definitely going to remember that scene. I really enjoyed that a lot. Yeah.
Good. Yeah, yeah, very well said. All right, so Tatum, do you want to reveal what film we're going to be talking about in the next episode? I'm very excited for this one.
Yes. So next week is my choice. And as hopefully all of you know, due to our introduction that we give every week, this podcast is where we talk about movies that films that move us from tears to laughter and everything in between. So there are lots of emotions that happen in between tears and laughter, and I don't quite know which emotion this movie falls under. I think it falls under several, depending on how old you are and where you were at the time and how you've developed. Uh, but yeah, next week we're going to be talking about Twilight.
Yes.
I will give my full spiel on my relationship with the content of the Twilight movies, the Twilight books next week. I don't want to go into that right now.
Are you going to reread the
Um,
entire book in preparation?
Uh, Absolutely not. No. um, Even though I did read the first book 9 times in like 6 months. Anyway, yeah. So next week we're talking about Twilight, guys. So join us for that. I think it's going to be a really, really fun conversation. This is one of those movies when Geneva and I made our initial list of movies. When we first started this podcast or planning this podcast, we started with 20 movies. And we were looking at the 20, and both of us were just cracking up when we saw that Twilight was on the list. So, yeah, I think we've both been looking forward to this for a while. So join us next week as we talk about the movie Twilight.
All right, very, very excited for that conversation next week. All right, till then,
Until then.
bye everybody. Thanks for listening. If you want to get in touch with us, you can email us at yourpigpod@gmail.com. Our theme song was composed by Joel Rushton, and our podcast graphic was designed by Kara Shin. If you like this show and want to hear more, please rate and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. We're excited to have you on this journey with us. Until next time.